Previously on The Story Behind.
The leading playmaker in the NBA, Lenny Wilkins.
From the Seattle SuperSonics, Spencer Hayward.
William Pelton Russell.
Sigma.
Oh, he's fine young player, this.
The Washington Bullets against the Seattle SuperSonics.
3, 2, 1, and the SuperSonics win their first ever NBA championship. The ball sails high in the air.
This is the story behind the Seattle SuperSonics. The Sonics' 1979 NBA championship marked the pinnacle of an extended stretch of excellence in Seattle. With emergent all-star Jack Sikma at center, Gus Williams, the leading scorer in the '79 finals, running point, long-tenured shooting guard Fred Brown still getting it done, and, of course, burgeoning franchise legend Lenny Wilkins firmly installed as head coach, the Sonics were one of the Western Conference's better teams through the early '80s. Following their 1979 championship run, the Sonics averaged 46 wins per year over the next 5 seasons, eclipsing 50 wins twice over that span while missing the playoffs only once. And in conjunction with their on-court success, the Sonics, just over a decade from their inception, had also emerged as one of the league's biggest attractions. For a 4-year stretch beginning in '78-79, the Sonics averaged more than 18,000 fans per game, while their per-game average of 21,725 in '79-80 was, at the time, an NBA record. However, while they were raking it in at the box office and getting it done on the floor, the Sonics weren't able to get back to the promised land during those halcyon days of the early '80s. Meanwhile, their owner, Sam Shulman, had started to grow disillusioned. Frustrated over escalating player salaries and stretched increasingly thin between his various business ventures, Shulman elected to sell the team to Seattle entrepreneur Barry Ackerley for $21 million in October of 1983, an admittedly traumatic decision for Shulman and a transformative one for the franchise. With the change in ownership and management came an abrupt and immediate decline. After finishing 4th in the West in 1982-83, the Sonics barely managed a winning record in Ackerley's first season as owner and didn't make it out of the first round of the playoffs. From there, the team really fell apart as the vestiges of their '79 championship team grew fewer and fewer. The Sonics traded Williams and lost Brown to retirement following the '83-84 campaign, putting an outsized burden on Sikma and up-and-coming power forward Tom Chambers. Ultimately, they were just too light in the talent department, and the Sonics fell to 31-51 in '84-85, their worst record since their ill-fated '72-73 season. That '84-85 campaign was so rough, in fact, that it cost Wilkins his head coaching job. That offseason, the Sonics transitioned Wilkins, the backbone of their organization, into a front office role, though he lasted only 1 season as general manager. After the increasingly unrecognizable Sonics stumbled again in '85-86, Wilkins left the organization to become the new head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. That same offseason, the Sonics also traded Sikma, their beloved 7-time All-Star, and severed the last remaining tie to their '79 championship team. It was a rough transition, one made even worse by the team's decision to return to the substandard Coliseum in '85-86, but the worst of it was over. After 2 ugly seasons of turnover, the Sonics enjoyed a modest bounce back thanks to continued growth from Chambers, the emergence of 1985 first-round pick Xavier McDaniel, and a shrewd trade for Dale Ellis following the '85-86 campaign. And while the new-look Sonics didn't exactly set the world on fire in '86-87, finishing at 39-43, that was still good enough to sneak into the playoffs, where Seattle, led by their power trio, nearly did the impossible. The 7th-seeded Sonics upset the heavily favored Dallas Mavericks in the first round, then bested Hakeem Olajuwon's Houston Rockets in the second round. However, their Cinderella run ended in the conference finals, where they got swept by the Lakers. Still, the Sonics had put the NBA on notice. They were back. Seattle cruised into the playoffs in each of the next 2 seasons, and notably eliminated Olajuwon's Rockets again in '88-89, even after losing Chambers to free agency the offseason prior. As it turned out though, the Sonics' modest success of the late '80s was just an appetizer, an opening act. Nobody knew it as the Sonics slumped off the floor in May of '89, having just been swept out of the playoffs by the Lakers again. But the real show was about to begin. Roughly 6 weeks after their defeat in the Western Conference semifinals, the Sonics, using the first-round pick they'd acquired from the 76ers in a house-cleaning trade years prior, selected a 6'10", 230-pound power forward by the name of Shawn Kemp, 17th overall in the '89 NBA draft. Just 19 years old and coming out of a community college in Texas, Kemp's inexperience and modest pedigree belied his potential. A remarkably explosive player, Kemp was capable of throwing down dunks more ferocious than the game had ever seen, and the Sonics felt he could be a difference maker. And they immediately threw the rookie into the fire. Kemp, as the youngest player in the NBA, played in all but one of Seattle's games in 1989-1990. He didn't play big minutes and started only once, but Kemp's game developed significantly as the year progressed, thanks in no small part to McDaniel, who mentored the young phenom. And while the Sonics as a team regressed that year, their mediocre 41-41 finish ultimately set the table for Seattle to land another potential superstar to pair up with Kemp. Miraculously, despite finishing tied for the best record among the 11 teams in the 1990 NBA draft lottery, the Sonics lucked into the second overall pick that year. Having solidified their front court with Kemp the year prior, Seattle netted themselves a ball handler and playmaker this time around, selecting point guard Gary Payton, a tenacious trash talker out of Oakland. Together, Kemp and Payton provided the Sonics with a nucleus as promising and as enviable as a team could hope for. Still, nobody could have anticipated just how electrifying and indomitable the Rayman in the glove would be. As a rookie, Payton started all 82 games for the revamped Sonics in 1990-91, enduring some expected growing pains, but ultimately leading the team in assists and steals. Kemp, meanwhile, took a major leap forward as a sophomore, averaging 15 points and 8.4 rebounds per game. Together, the pair ended Seattle's playoff drought at one season, and they were only scratching the surface. The following season, despite stumbling out of the gate and landing a new head coach mid-season in George Karl, the Sonics finished 47-35 and returned to the playoffs thanks to a late-season surge. Kemp upped his rebounds that year. Payton upped his points per game. The two were growing, and their aggressive, street ball-inspired style of play was not only endearing them to the locals, many of whom had nodded off during the doldrums of the mid-'80s, but it was turning the Sonics into one of the NBA's must-see attractions.
That was inhuman.
By 92-93, Kemp and Payton were officially cooking. The big man earned his first of 6 consecutive All-Star nominations that year, while Payton finished second on the team in win shares. The two propelled the Sonics to a 55-27 record and pushed Seattle all the way to Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals, where they ultimately had their championship hopes dashed by Charles Barkley's Suns. That heartbreak was followed, however, by a season for the ages in 1993-94, a genuine Sonic boom. Led by Payton, who received his first of 9 All-Star nominations that year, an increasingly unstoppable Kemp, plus key offseason additions Detlef Schrempf and Kendall Gill, the Sonics steamrolled their way to a franchise record 63 wins, finishing with the best record in the NBA and their first division title since their '79 championship season. They were far and away the best team in the Western Conference, and as fate would have it, they wouldn't have Michael Jordan, who was momentarily trying his hand at baseball, standing between them and an NBA championship. It was theirs for the taking. The Sonics just didn't take it. Instead, after going up 2-0 on the 8th-seeded, barely above 500 Denver Nuggets in their first-round best-of-5, the Sonics imploded, losing 3 straight in a historic collapse. It was the first time in NBA history that a number 1 seed had lost in the first round, and the ensuing season followed a similar script. The Sonics, playing out of the Tacoma Dome about 30 miles south of Seattle while their decrepit old Coliseum was being renovated, dominated the regular season, finishing 57-25, only to lose in agonizing fashion in the first round of the playoffs. No heads rolled though. Karl kept his job, as did general manager Wally Walker. And the Sonics returned to their upgraded but still sorely lacking Coliseum, now named Key Arena, desperate to get over the hump in 95-96. They came close. Following a historic 64-18 regular season, the best in franchise history, the Sonics cruised through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs and outlasted the Utah Jazz in the Western Conference Finals to earn a date with Jordan's 72-win Bulls in the NBA Finals. For the first time in a quarter century, and just the third time in their history, the Sonics were playing for the title. But nobody was beating those Bulls. Nobody. Chicago stormed out to a 3-0 series lead, with his airness averaging 31 points per game. The Sonics made a valiant effort with their backs against the wall, taking games 4 and 5 to make a series of it, but the Bulls didn't allow the finals to go to a Game 7, winning 87-75 in Game 6 at the United Center to kick off their second championship three-peat. For Seattle, however, that finals defeat marked the beginning of the end, not only for the Sonic Boom duo, but for the Sonics as a franchise. After one more season in Seattle and another early postseason exit, Kemp, increasingly disgruntled and seeking a bigger contract than the Sonics were prepared to give him, was traded to Cleveland, who eventually gave him a 7-year, $107 million deal. Incidentally, Kemp's performance tailed off in a big way midway through that contract, as he struggled with conditioning and substance abuse problems. Within 4 years of signing that deal, he was playing 16 minutes a night coming off the bench for Portland. Payton, meanwhile, picked up the slack following Kemp's departure, carrying Seattle to another division title in 97-98, but the Sonics met their customary fate in the playoffs, and from that point onward, the franchise became a perennial also-ran. In 2001, sensing a bleak future after 2 straight mediocre seasons and mediocre attendance numbers, Ackerley sold the team for $200 million to an ownership group headed by Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz, a decision that paved the way for their eventual relocation. Schultz took control of the team fully aware of its profitability issues and the deficiencies at Key Arena, but he was nevertheless confident that he could get public money to either finance more renovations to the stadium or build the team a new stadium altogether. Not only was that assumption flawed, but Schultz's ownership philosophy and business practices were alienating people within the organization. According to Payton, who was traded away in 2003 for future Hall of Famer Ray Allen, Schultz was a knucklehead who tried to run a basketball team like a coffee company, which, Payton noted, you can't do. Ultimately, the team was mostly lousy under Schultz, despite Allen's best efforts and an unexpected run to the Western Conference semis in 04-05. And once Schultz realized that there was no political will to give him taxpayer money for a new stadium, he sold the team for $350 million in 2006 to a group of Oklahoma City investors fronted by Clay Bennett, a death knell for the team's future in Seattle.
It is our desire to have the Sonics and Storm remain in Seattle. Sonics, Storm, and Seattle are synonymous. We have great respect for history.
Even if the locals refused to see it, or were swayed by Bennett's hollow assurances about keeping the team in Seattle, the writing was on the wall. The Sonics arena was a dump. Their attendance had dwindled, and their roster was in a bad state. Even though, when the sale was approved by the NBA's Board of Governors in the fall of 2006, the Sonics were only months away from drafting a young phenom named Kevin Durant. As a condition of the sale, Bennett was required to make a good faith effort to secure a suitable home stadium in the Seattle area for the team, but whatever efforts he did make never materialized. In November of 2007, just over 1 year after taking ownership of the team, Bennett informed the NBA of his intention to relocate the franchise to OKC, even amid all the legal red tape, including eventual lawsuits from the city of Seattle and another last-ditch suit from Schultz himself, who tried to get the Sonics back from Bennett on the grounds that he never made a good faith effort to keep the team in Seattle. Those lawsuits, however, ultimately amounted to little. On April 13, 2008, the Sonics played their last game in Seattle, with Durant, the eventual Rookie of the Year, dropping 19 points in a 99-95 win over the Dallas Mavericks. 3 days later, the Sonics played their final game ever, a 126-121 victory over the Golden State Warriors. The Sonics finished that season 20-62, and 2 days later, in a resounding 28-2 vote, the NBA's Board of Governors approved the relocation of the Sonics to Oklahoma City. The new team would be called the Thunder. And a decade and a half later, all that remains of the Sonics, Seattle's first major men's pro sports team, are 4 decades worth of memories, profound resentment towards Schultz and Bennett, and, of course, down on First Avenue, the stadium once known as Key Arena, which was redeveloped and is now known as Climate Pledge Arena, home of the NHL's Seattle Kraken. But among the lingering bitterness, there's also hope. During that final season in Seattle, Save Our Sonics chants poured down from the bleachers of the Key, and that spirit has endured for nearly a decade and a half. Local investors and politicians have been angling to restore NBA basketball in Seattle from the moment the Sonics left, and Climate Pledge Arena was even refurbished to meet NBA specifications. The efforts seem to be gaining traction. In 2020, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver said Seattle would be at the top of his list in terms of future expansion cities. In early 2022, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell said the odds are high of his city getting an NBA team in the near future. Nothing is guaranteed, of course, but there is clearly momentum. It wasn't long ago, after all, that Seattle was home to one of the NBA's most prosperous franchises. Maybe, in the not-too-distant future, it will be again.
Lead pass to Kemp, he'll what a lob!
Thanks for watching. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button.